what I will say is basically this. We have a region which is in total mess, and it's not an episode. We are going to have to live with a Middle East, as I always call it, which is disintegrating, imploding, collapsing for years to come. I believe personally that we are speaking about much more than a decade or two. The old system is gone. After 100 years, the borders are no longer borders. Anybody who is using the maps that we have in our atlases or on the internet of the Middle East, describing the borders, the boundaries between countries, is talking history. In order to read the Middle East today, you need to use the map that me and my team are using now in the office, which is the tribal distribution of the Middle East. The borders are gone. Not all of them yet, but they are gone. And from an Israeli point of view, the system that was in place for the past over 40 years along our borders is also gone. The multinational force in the Sinai, based there since the Israeli-Egyptian Peace Treaty of '79, they do not venture out of their camp. American battalion, not just the Fijian battalion. At one point, one single Bedouin with a Kalashnikov submachine gun laid siege to the main camp of the MFO. One Bedouin with a submachine gun, because they are observers. They are not peacekeepers. They are not supposed to shoot. So they are not really in an operating functioning anymore. On the Golan Heights, UNDOF, the UN force, again a battalion from Fiji, they are deriving some income from the Middle Eastern conflict. They cannot operate because the Syrian government, Mr. Assad, have lost control over 90% of the extent of the border between the Golan Heights and Syria. And UNDOF is not manning anymore their outposts. In Lebanon, UNIFIL, Hezbollah totally disregards them. And the Israelis quietly too, because they are totally inefficient. So the border system that we have known is gone. And what is emerging? Is a tribal society in which I remember President Sadat's old, he passed away years ago, old fantastic ambassador to the UN, Tahsin Bashir. He used to say to me in Cairo, he said, in the Middle East, you're all tribes with flags. The only nation is Egypt. We are back to where we are tribes with flags. And each tribe around the region picks their allegiance. You want to join ISIS, you join Al-Qaeda, you join somebody else, but you act as a tribal unit. So this is the situation which poses to Israel the following dilemma. We have had tougher times, and I think I would be correct to say that Israel had to confront much more dangerous challenges in the past. However, this time is a more complex set of challenges that we have to face, to confront simultaneously. On 6 fronts, different challenges at the same time. Never before. So don't envy the chief of staff of the IDF, who has to provide response to 6 different types of challenges, or his boss, the Minister of Defense. And I will go quickly through the challenges. challenge number one is the Palestinians on the West Bank. We are now into what I call the psychotic stage of the Palestinian war against Israel. You don't have an intifada, there is no organization, there is no leadership, there is no command. It's an atmosphere, a climate that was in many ways created by the Palestinian Authority, nice old Mr. Abbas, which drives teenagers, mainly from some of the neighborhoods of East Jerusalem and the Hebron area, to take a gun, to take a knife and stab somebody. One of them was an 80-year-old woman, or ram a car into a border police guy on the roadblock. We see signs that it's beginning to subside in terms of intensity. So far we had altogether, let's say, between 60 and 70 Palestinians killed. About 12, I'm afraid it's going to be in the next few hours 13, because somebody is in very bad shape in hospital in Jerusalem. 13 Israelis killed. It doesn't have a purpose. It doesn't have the support of the great majority of the Palestinian population. The Palestinian population in general in the West Bank is under the impression of the results and the consequences of the Second Intifada, the one led by late Chairman Arafat. For them, that was a fiasco, catastrophe, a failure. They don't want to go back there. For the first time, by the way, we have in the recent weeks articles and people on the Palestinian side coming out publicly, loudly, against the stabbings, saying we don't want to go there, and there are so far no repercussions. It never happened before. So the people that we see with the knife are teenagers. Almost all of them. It's people who don't have a recollection of the Second Intifada. They have not been there. They heard stories. They believe in the myths produced by Arafat and his lieutenants. And the atmosphere is such that when Israel hands back the body of the guy who tried to stab somebody and was shot to the back to the Palestinian Authority, then you will have tens of thousands in the funeral, screaming all sorts of anti-Israeli slogans, and then they will go home. There will not be a demonstration, a big demonstration, or thousands on the streets, as we have seen in the second and especially the first Intifada. That doesn't happen. It's a teenager affair. In a way, also a protest against their leadership, against their elders, etc. But one thing I owe you, which is why. And the why has two explanations. One, Israel. We have a very dangerous process in Israel in which the government has lost control to a great degree over a group of hardcore extremist youngsters who do not recognize the state of Israel. we are speaking of something between 300 and 500 young guys. On the heels of different illegal outposts in the West Bank, with some support group inside Israel. The Israeli security services, for this or that reason, were unable to control this phenomenon, to bring people to trial. Now they are using administrative detention. About 30 to 40 and more are prevented from going to the West Bank. These people were carrying out all sorts of provocative actions against mainly Palestinian property, but as was the case in the village of Duma, also killing people. This signaled to the Palestinians that maybe, and this would be their inclination to believe, that maybe this is somehow sanctioned quietly by the Israeli authorities. Now the government is trying to correct it, but it's difficult. It's difficult, I'll level with you, because Bibi is a very weak prime minister now. He doesn't control his own party. It's not the Likud of 10 years ago. The party has been taken over by right-wingers, not the kind of the Hills boys that I was describing before, but right-wingers. And Bibi is in a minority in his own parliamentary faction. I think he doesn't have the support of most of the Likud ministers in government. And he's totally exhausted. Totally exhausted. Believe me. Every single problem comes to his table. He doesn't have the proper people around him. He doesn't. He has Sarah, but I'm not talking about her. And because he's so exhausted, is so overwhelmed, he makes those very costly mistakes, like the one about the Mufti and Hitler. So there was this loss of control over the Hill boys on the part of the Israeli government. On the Palestinian side, the Palestinian Authority and its security organs, that's the 9 battalions trained by the Americans in Jordan, with Israeli support and assistance, etc., they lost control over the refugee camps of the West Bank. And some more neighborhoods. And in the refugee camps, there are many in the West Bank, about 2 or 3 around each city in the West Bank. We have seen over the past 3-4 years the emergence of armed gangs, of teenagers, who were mainly preoccupied so far with harassing the Palestinian Authority officials and security units. But now some of them, not the majority, are getting involved in the simcha, in the festival that is going on now. However, the big difference, and this is the thing to watch, the Fatah Tanzim. Tanzim means in Arabic the organization, let's call it the youth movement and membership cadres of Fatah. Many of them are armed, equipped with weapons, not knives. With the emphasis on the refugee camps. They are not joining the fray now. They are not joining the fray. They led the second Intifada because they had the instructions from Arafat. Go out. Set up the production lines of suicide bombers, etc. This doesn't exist now. As long as Fatah cadres are out, this is bound to subside. This is one front, one challenge that the Israelis have to deal with. And Israel would like to finish it with as little casualties, both for us and for the Palestinians, as possible. The Israeli defense forces are trying to keep the West Bank, traffic to Israel and out of Israel and workers and commerce, etc., as open as possible, in order not to maintain the normalcy and not to drive additional segments of the population into action. I think it's about to subside, but it takes time, because what we are talking about is not an organized violence, but individual initiatives, and you can't predict how many we are going to have. The second challenge that we face is Hamas. Briefly, Hamas is very keen to maintain the ceasefire following protective edge operation. They feel, unlike what many Israelis think, that they have been beaten quite severely. They have standing orders not to allow the Salafi groups, etc., to fire rockets. Sometimes they do. The Egyptians have imposed a total blockade on Gaza. They are flooding the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, which is going to ruin, by the way, the subterranean aquifer of water forever with salt water, seawater. They couldn't care less. The Egyptian Air Force is now bombing, sometimes targets, 50 meters away from the Israeli border. Hamas is trying to light the fire in the West Bank, but they don't want the Gaza Strip involved. It leads me to the third challenge, which is ISIS. Hamas is assisting ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula in spite of their futile attempt to reach some sort of accommodation with General Sisi, with the Egyptian authorities, because they need Egypt badly. However, they cannot resist the temptation of cooperating with ISIS Sinai, formerly known as Ansar Bait al-Maqdis, terrorist organization, based on what we call the Torah Bora of Sinai, Jebel Halal, in the central area of the Sinai. And Hamas is doing that because they want ISIS to help them arrange for whatever is still possible by way of smuggling weapons and missiles from Iran into the Gaza Strip. So the arrangement is that ISIS Sinai will allow or help in the smuggling. There are only about 15-20 tunnels still operational, perhaps out of 1,000. And ISIS will take their cut. Now, the cut is something which bothers the Egyptians and the Israelis very much. They are equipped now, ISIS Sinai, and I'm not referring to the Russian plane. They think it's a bomb, probably a bomb. But they have SA-18, SA-22, most advanced shoulder missiles. They have from Libya, in quantities. They have anti-tank weapons, third generation. ISIS Sinai, I'll repeat what I said last year, because Helene was not there. Last year I said Israel and Egypt have agreed to change quietly, no announcements made, the peace treaty between the two countries. The peace treaty prohibits the presence of Egyptian military in most of the Sinai Peninsula. Israel has given consent through a certain mechanism that we have with the Americans. Israel has given its consent to the Egyptian deploying in the Sinai over more than a mechanized division with 2 squadrons of Apache attack helicopters and F-16s in El Arish Airport to fight ISIS. The Egyptians are fighting, and they are very serious about it. But they are not successful. And ISIS is ambushing them and hitting them and exacting blood from the Egyptian army. And they are unable to uproot them. They destroy whole villages in the Sinai of the Bedouins. And they say, and we believe them, that at one point they will switch to us. And I said last year, and I think the year before, it's not a question of when, it's a question of if. But there is nothing that prevents ISIS Sinai from employing anti-tank missiles in order to totally disrupt shipping through the Gulf of Aqaba to Eilat and the Aqaba port of Jordan. Nothing. The Egyptian army is not up to it, as we can see so far. So ISIS Sinai is a big problem. Luckily, we have completed the fence. That was a good decision by Bibi. We are in better control of the area. We have very close cooperation with the Egyptians, including joint Air Force training, also with the Jordanians. But that's a front. And Israel has created a new division to control this sector, etc., etc. The other front is Hezbollah. 2 sentences. Hezbollah is in Syria. About, let's say, between 8,000 and 10,000 fighters of Hezbollah are in Syria. It's not a big organization. Altogether, they have maybe 15,000 under arms. So at least half the fighting force, including the elite units, those that were established in order to try and grab chunks of the Galilee in the next war, are all committed to Syria. They have so far something between 600 and 700 killed, few thousands injured. They are not in the mood to pick a fight with Israel now. And we are watching very closely how they fight in Syria, the rebels. And on the one hand, what we see is that the performance, the fighting skill and performance is very poor. Very encouraging to watch them. Sometimes I really enjoy it. Because they are not fighting an army, they are fighting groups of rebels. And they are unable to, for example, Zabadani, they've been fighting for this small townlet of Zabadani for 4 or 5 months now. They cannot take it. They cannot. So on the one hand, very poor performance. On the other hand, for the first time in their history, they are learning how to go on the attack. First time. They were never on the attack before, always under defense against the IDF. The next challenge is Russia. We now have the Russian Air Force as a neighbor. Our planes fly over Syria all the time, over Lebanon all the time, if only to collect intelligence. But we are in the air all the time. And the Russians are in the air. And now they are deployed in 4 air bases in Syria. Plus they have taken T4, Tayas, from the Syrians and chased out the Iranians, etc. It's a very uneasy closeness. There is a mechanism of coordination, and the Russians are very clear in their effort to convince Israel that there are no ulterior motives behind their intervention in Syria, except make sure that Russia keeps its place in the region, etc. I'll say a word about it in a minute. But it's very sensitive. When the Russian Air Force, they did it only once, attacks rebel targets that are, in a way, supported and assisted by Israel, south of Damascus, let's get a bit complex. And they did, once. As you know, I've been speaking about it before, as you know, we are treating wounded rebels in Israel by now close to 1,500. It doesn't happen by itself. A guy who is severely injured doesn't walk to the Israeli border, to the field hospital, or etc. There is a system that works between us and the rebels, the non-ISIS rebels. And most of the south is good guys. Southern Front, they're called Southern Front, and it's a coalition of rebels. But the Russian presence is a big headache. If I may, one paragraph about the Russians. Obama has left the Middle East. That's no news to anybody. And into the void, steps in Putin. And what Putin is trying to do, he doesn't care about Assad. He will drop him any day of the week for the right price. He is busy building something else. He's busy building what I call his own Baghdad Pact. For those of you who remember Baghdad Pact that the West established in the region back in the mid-50s. He wants to go to Iraq, and he's saying to Prime Minister Abadi, you see what the Americans are doing, have achieved in 1 year of air campaign against ISIS. 0. Give me an airbase. He wants Talil Air Base in Nasiriyah province. I'll do. I'll help you. And Iran, they are going to supply Iran with modern weapons as we progress from the nuclear deal. And that's going to be an axis sponsored by Russia in the region. And here I come to the last challenge, which is Iran. Now, everybody is talking about the nuclear deal, etc. I've nothing much to tell you, except what I said outside. There is no deal. Anybody who says there is an agreement, there is no agreement. There is a set of understandings. Congress said whatever they wanted. The Iranians didn't even bother to ratify. And they will not. And I'm telling you now, they will not implement the way it's written in the deal. They will not. They have no intention to. Read what Khamenei says. That he's not just saying, that's what happens. The Iranians are now busy trying to save Assad because he was about to be toppled. I think without the Russian intervention, it would have taken a few months, no more. And it would happen in a bang, not a process, but at one point it explodes. The Iranians have a strategy. So it's now to keep Assad, and they are willing to sacrifice Hezbollah, and they have lost already between 15 and 20 Iranian generals helping the battle to conduct the battles in Syria. But the Iranians have something which gets very close to the Russian perception of a new Russian-sponsored, what I call Baghdad Pact. They don't call it like this. The Iranians want one thing, a land corridor between Iran and the Israeli border, between Iran and the Mediterranean. That's what they're after. Anybody, if people are interested in it, can give you privately the link. Anybody who thinks that Iranian talk about the extermination, annihilation, destruction of the state of Israel is mere talk is wrong. There is some strategic, not planning, I wouldn't say planning at this stage. There is a strategic concept behind it, strategic idea. And that's the land corridor. Excuse me. Just hold. What is the land corridor? The Iranians are basically the dominant power now in most of Iraq, controlled by a sort of Shiite government in Baghdad. They have raised in Iraq what they call the Popular Mobilization Forces, Shiites, militias, trained by the Iranians, mainly under a fellow by the name of Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, that we know for years. They have raised over 100,000 Shiite fighters. The Iraqi army does not really exist. It melted away like butter in the sun when ISIS attacked and took Mosul over a year ago, including the famous Golden Division. What they want now, and they are not in a hurry, but the plan is for them to take over Western Iraq. We don't have a map here, but if you that's where they were lobbying. Saddam was lobbying the Scud missiles against Israel during the '91 Gulf War. They want, this is a desert area, vast desert area, all the way, if you see the map, going west of Baghdad towards the Syrian border, Syrian and Jordanian border, with one highway only. Sunni tribes, not densely populated, of course, desert. It's now under control. You can speak about control of a desert like this, but it's now, you have important, significant pockets of ISIS control along this highway and the other areas. And the Iranians think that it's possible for their militias to take over this region and link up with Syria, with Assad forces and the Euphrates River on the other side. And from there, you connect with Hezbollah, you reach the Mediterranean, you reach the Israeli border. It's the land corridor that they are after. The land corridor will allow them to move supplies, to move forces whenever they are ready. They are not ready now. To move forces. It will create a contiguous theater of operation for them. Now, the question is, and I don't have the answer, to what extent there is a difference in the objectives Putin and the Iranians. Is Putin willing to allow or even assist an Iranian effort to obtain this? It's a major issue, nobody talks about it. And I think from a military point of view, it's doable for the Iranians. Not this year, maybe not next year, but it's doable. We're talking about an area which is, I don't know, 50% bigger than the Sinai Peninsula. The IDF conquered the Sinai Peninsula in '67, in 4 days. So these are the challenges. And I'll conclude by saying this. These are huge challenges, each different from the other, each requiring a different response, different type of military forces, different type of diplomacy. And that's a bit too much, in my humble opinion as a citizen. That's a bit too much for the government the way it is now. Having said that, I have to be honest with you and say that when I look to the opposition, I see nothing. So it's a bind. I don't know whether Bibi and Mr. Herzog can bring themselves at one point to have a national unity government. It won't hold, even if they do, for a long time. I think that the best that can happen now for us is that because Bibi, I believe, is at the end of his political career, I don't believe he can win another election. I don't believe Herzog is a serious candidate to be prime minister. There is nobody else in sight. I believe that there will be a reality which will drive people who are nowhere now, or not in politics, I mean, to step in. Because it wouldn't be the right thing to do to try and cope with these challenges, which, as I said at the start, are going to persist with us for years, under a present very weak, very mixed government coalition, which can lose majority in parliament any day of the week. I'll stop here.